So I have videos on my channel talking about ice balls, round spherical ice formations. I talk about ooids, round pearl-like carbonate grain formations, and even giant rock balls several meters in diameter. But I've just been informed that there is another type of ball that I should talk about. Apparently, there are also balls made up of moss? Yes, that's right. This is actually a freshwater green algae species called A. linnaei. I'm not going to try and say the genus name. You can just figure that one out for yourself. In any case, these moss balls, the ball formations that this algae forms sometimes, are also nicknamed lake balls or cladophora balls or Marimo in Japanese, as they are often found in Lake Akan in Japan. And they reach over 20 centimeters in diameter. This lake in Japan is the best known habitat of Marimo on modern Earth. But how do these moss balls grow and maintain their spherical shape? This algal species is a branched filamentous form that grows in three ways. One, attached or epilithic, in other words, just attached to rock or substrate or the lake floor or sediment. Two, floating and unattached forms. And three, aggregative forms. The aggregates are the ones that form the spheres or the moss balls or Marimo. And although these balls are biological rather than geological phenomena, and I am a channel that talks about geology, their growth, or rather their maintenance of their spherical shape, is surprisingly geological, or at least similar to those geological balls that I've talked about in previous videos. For example, Marimo are polished in a way into their spherical shapes by rotation-induced wind waves, which is very similar to ooids and ice balls, which I've talked about in previous videos. Ooids are round concretionary mineral deposits or mineral precipitates around some sort of nucleus, like a mineral fragment or sand grain or whatever it might be. And they do this because they're in the shallow shoal environment with waxing and waning waves that roll them around and cause the precipitation of the calcium carbonate around that grain to be in this round spherical, polished, pearl-like form. And then ice balls have a similar polishing process during their growth or mineral precipitation. But Marimo do not grow around a nucleus grain of some sort like ooids do. Rather, the algal filaments grow in all directions from the center, which lays the foundation for the continued spherical growth. Gentle wave action turns them over, maintaining their spherical shape and ensuring that they can photosynthesize no matter which side is turned up. You might think that these balls are only green on their outer parts because that's where the photosynthesis is taking place. However, they're actually green throughout, even though light only penetrates a short distance within the ball. The chlorophyll, the molecule that makes photosynthesizing organisms like algae green, this chlorophyll is present within the interior of the moss ball, but inside the moss ball it remains dormant in the dark and then only becomes active if exposed to the light. For example, if the ball breaks apart, which, as we'll talk about, seems to occur quite often. Individual moss balls consist of aggregates of branched algal filaments and grow by photosynthesis, like we just talked about. And there are two main types that these aggregates can occur in. For example, one is the tangled aggregate that is more of a tangled sphere of the algal filaments, and then two, like we talked about, the radial aggregates that start at the center by growing outwards in all directions, and then their spherical growth continues from there with wave action, as we'll talk about later. The polish process enhances the water exchange between the interior and exterior of the moss ball, recycling nutrients for growth. Thus, Marimo growth is due to both physical or geological and biological processes that work together to sustain or create a self-sustaining ecosystem of continued Marimo growth. And we'll talk later about how there's like a generational change and kind of continuum of these moss balls within their colonies of moss balls. They kind of work together to continue their self-sustaining cycles, which to me is super cool. I always think things like microbial mats that are individual organisms yet working together as like a team to sustain these colonies of growth is really cool. And this almost seems like that, and I'll talk later about why. So these moss balls have specifically been studied, or mostly been studied, in Lake Akan and Japan, like I talked about earlier, because that's their main habitat on Earth today. And the giant moss balls specifically grow in a water depth of around 2 to 3 meters, and they often form layered colonies, like I just mentioned, like microbial mats almost. Within these colonies, they range in size from a few centimeters diameter to over 30 centimeters in diameter and form layers with the smallest Marimo or smallest moss balls at the bottom and the largest ones, the giant ones, at the top. This is because when Marimo diameter becomes greater than 10 centimeters, a central cavity forms due to decomposition. Basically, within the Marimo that are decomposing the internal dormant algae as the external surface algae continues to photosynthesize and grow the ball. And as the decomposition occurs, it's recycling nutrients for the moss ball itself as water is exchanged throughout the system. But it's also creating a central cavity, which leads to the specific density of the larger, over 10 centimeter moss balls to decrease, causing larger Marimo on top kind of colony scenario instead of smaller ones being on top. It also likely has to do with the concept called kinetic sieving. Kinetic sieving is a concept in geology that I've talked about in my alluvial fan video, which was like really old video. I'm probably going to redo at some point, but in that video I discuss how in alluvial fan environments or depositional environments adjacent to mountain ranges where sediment, like from mass wasting events, for example, will come down and deposit adjacent to that mountain, and that will sometimes form this larger gravel at the top and smaller grains at the bottom grading scenario. It's called reverse grading in geology. And the reason is because the smaller grains, it's like a sieve. If you've ever used a sieve, if you're a real geologist, the larger grains stay at the top because they can't fit through the sieve filters, and then the smaller grains go to the bottom of the sieve. And so because of this mechanism happening in natural environments like the alluvial fan environment, I imagine that in these Marimo colonies, it's kind of similar, where the larger ones can only stay at the top because they're so big and their specific densities are lower. They're not as heavy or dense. Then the dense, tiny ones sink to the bottom because one, they fit, and two, they're denser. So like I talked about, these moss balls are green throughout, even though light doesn't penetrate throughout the entire ball. Thus, the chlorophyll inside remains dormant, but can become active when exposed if the Marimo collapses, which often happens, as I'll talk about later. But you might wonder, what happens if fine sediments and particulate organic matter, or POM, covers their surfaces? Would this inhibit photosynthesis? Well, thankfully, because of the wave action that polishes the spherical shapes of the Marimo in the first place, this is also the mechanism that kind of shakes off any sediment or particulate organic matter from their surfaces and allows them to continue photosynthesizing and growing. But what drives the rotation of Marimo in the first place? The current induced by inflow into Lake Akan, for example, is too weak to drive Marimo rotation. So then the other two options is wind-driven movement. There are two wind-driven movements throughout Lake Akan. One is the wind-driven current, and two is the wind-driven oscillatory waves. The wind-driven current sometimes washes giant Marimo to shore during typhoon events. But on regular days, non-typhoon days, wind waves are the primary drivers of moss ball rotation. The wind wave-driven movement polishes Marimo's surfaces, but these moss balls don't grow at the same rate year-round. They actually have an annual ring structure associated with ice cover. Seasonal analyses show that Marimo surfaces are highly dense in the spring and summer compared to fall and winter. In other words, they become kind of bushy and loose during the fall and winter, which is due to the lack of motion because the lake is covered with ice. This ice cover prevents wind-driven waves, and thus they're in kind of a hibernation-like still state during the winter. So the sparse and dense patterns within Marimo annual layers result from these seasonal changes. This is very similar to the formation of seasonal layers, which we often see in sediment layers like varves. Varves are sediment layers that often form in glacial-fed lakes because during the spring and summer, there's a lot of ice melt that leads to a lot of inflow of a lot of heavier, lighter, larger grained sediment in those warmer periods. And then in the winter, during ice cover, all that you have are thinner layers of darker, organic, rich mud deposits from tiny mud and silt particles suspended in the lake settling over long periods of time during winter, during ice cover, and organic matter that leads to the darkened color of those layers as well that settles during those times. Marimo also have this concept of generational change or turnover, like I mentioned earlier. Basically, this works because typhoon winds can move giant Marimo to shore where they collapse and shrink to a smaller size and then tumble back down over the slope into the colony again and then fall down into a lower level or layer of the colony and kind of allow this turnover or, shifting of generations of Marimo colony layers to shift upward and allow the smaller ones to then get larger, and then they'll go to shore eventually and then kind of turn over and go down to the bottom layers and so on and so on. This generational change occurs every 5 to 9 years in Lake Akan, and this is one of the significant factors controlling giant mossball formation. Thus, although typhoons do not drive that daily, everyday movement or rotation of the Marimo that maintains their spherical shape, they're super important for the turnover of Marimo layers within the larger colonies that they form, which leads to their self-sustaining cycles or contributes to it at least. It's also been proposed that the rarity of reproductive cell formation in the aggregate forms of this algae, the mossball forms, might be key to maintaining their ball shape. Because zoospore or reproductive cell formation can lead to the fragmentation of aggregate forms of this algae, it's thought that there are very low levels in aggregate forms of reproductive cell formation may maintain their spherical form. Also, like we talked about earlier, organic matter decomposition occurs within the central area of the Marimo, and that creates a cavity and also releases nutrients to the outer portion of the mossball, which leads to levels of dissolved nitrogen and dissolved phosphorus, which are major limiting nutrients in pretty much any ecosystem, that can be selectively used for growth. So the combination of oscillation and rotation, polishing mossballs during the wind wave movement, and the recycling of their internal nutrients for growth leads to a self-sustaining growing system, not only in, individual Marimo or mossballs, but also within their colonies due to the typhoon generational change as well. However, unfortunately, the nutrient cycles of Marimo might be in danger due to climate change. Because climate change could change the mean wind speed and frequency of strong winds, this could greatly deteriorate the water exchange between Marimo interior and exterior layers, which would hinder that nutrient cycling process. And this could change generational turnover if typhoon occurrence changes in frequency, intensity, etc. And both of these processes are critical for growth of Marimo individuals and colonies. Given the fact that it takes nearly 17 years for Marimo to grow from 3 to 25 centimeters in diameter, as measured from studying those in Lake Akan, favorable conditions for the colonies and their individuals must remain relatively stable over very long periods of time to promote giant Marimo growth. The species of algae responsible for giant mossball growth was once widely distributed around the world. Free-floating and epilithic or attached forms of this algae are more common than the rare mossball aggregate forms. And the populations of mossball or aggregate forms of this algae have been rapidly decreasing worldwide. Now they are only known for Lake Akan in Japan and one single lake in Iceland that I am not pronouncing because I'm gonna get it wrong. Large or giant Marimo, over 20 centimeters in diameter, exist only in Lake Akan to our current knowledge. And due to deforestation and pollution, even those Marimo populations in Lake Akan have been steeply dropping. In some regions, this decline has occurred due to eutrophication. I've talked about eutrophication in many of my videos. It's caused by overnutrification and out-of-control algal blooms, which caught my attention regarding mossballs because I'd never imagined that an algal species would begin to decline due to eutrophication. You would think that eutrophication and algal production would be favorable for all algae species, but it's not. Apparently, different algae species will respond differently depending on the eutrophication and which algal species is overproducing, etc. So eutrophication is not a good thing for Marimo or mossballs, and they have been declining because of it. So ultimately, this just emphasizes our need to understand better the intricacies of climate and ecosystems, especially regarding populations of mossballs and other sensitive algal and, non-algal species out there, pretty much any species sensitive to changes like this, and really understand how we can mitigate these effects. But in any case, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about these really cool mossballs and how, although they're bio or biological, they have a lot of geological attributes, or I guess geological processes really contribute to their maintenance of their spherical form. And with the other ball videos I did, I felt that this was fitting to kind of finish out the ball series. Maybe I won't. Maybe there's more spherical formations that I have not yet come across out there that you guys will let me know in the comments if I've missed any, but I think I've hit pretty much most of the really cool spherical formations happening out there in nature. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. References are linked down below in the description box, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.